We are one full race into the 2018 playoffs, and some drivers really impressed and others really disappointed. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric. Welcome to this week's episode of Out of the Groove, where we talk about all the biggest stories in the NASCAR world, week in and week out. We've got a pretty good amount to discuss today. If you are new to the channel, be sure to hit subscribe and click the little notifications icon so that you will be notified every time I upload a new episode. I upload a new Out of the Grooves every Thursday, and I've got Double E Cup Series returning very soon, so you aren't going to want to miss it. So like I said, we are now one race into the playoffs, one race into the round of 16, and we've got a pretty good feel, I think, of who are big contenders and who some of the guys are going to play catch-up. I think we have a pretty good idea of who those guys are. Talking about Chicagoland, no surprise, Martin Truex Jr. wins again, his 5th win of the season, this one at 1.5 miles. He had one of the best cars most all day. I believe he led the most laps, and he won the race really without too much drama behind it. As a result, he's added yet more bonus points to his already insane total that he can use up throughout the playoffs, and they've once again established themselves firmly, I believe, as the easy favorites for the championship. Also, he's locked into the next round, but with all the bonus points he has, he was practically locked in already. So not a lot to talk about there. Looking at some of the other playoff drivers, Kyle Busch, who's one of a lot of people's favorites, possibly make it to the Final Four, make it to the championship, he struggled, not with his race car, but with several other issues. After winning the first stage of the race, after a pit stop, Kyle Busch radioed he had a loose wheel, he had to come in and pit under green, put him a lap down, but during that pit stop, his pit crew committed a violation. They came over the wall too soon. He had to pit again or do a pass-through. Kyle Busch at that point was 2 laps down, and in a race like it was this weekend with mostly a lot of green flag runs, not too many yellows, Kyle was never able to get back on the lead lap. He finished the first car 1 lap down. He finished in 15th. Now, he has a pretty good amount of bonus points coming in. He had 2 wins this year, and I think he had 7 or 8 stage wins as well, so he has a decent amount of bonus points. He's still looking all right in the standings. I'll talk a little bit about the standings here in a moment. The second place finisher in the race was Chase Elliott. He won stage number 2 and showed some speed. We haven't seen too much from that car lately, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Some of you guys probably know where I'm going with that. The rest of the top 5 was made up of some pretty good playoff contenders. Harvick 3rd, Hamlin 4th, and Kyle Larson 5th. And if you ask me, I talked about this last week in my predictions. I have Harvick making it to the Final Four, and I also have Larson making it to the Final Four. I have Hamlin kind of on the bubble there, making it at least to the round of 8. So I think those 3 drivers are all in contention, if you ask me, to make it to Homestead. Continuing through the running order, the rest of the top 10 had Brad Keselowski finishing 6th, Jimmy Johnson was 8th, Matt Kenseth 9th, and Jamie McMurray was 10th. Now those 4 never showed the same speed that some of those leaders had. They never had what Truex or Elliott or Kyle Busch or some of those other guys like Harvick had throughout the race, but most of them consistently ran in or near the top 10 all day, and they all had solid performances. Johnson and Keselowski, I think, really cemented their position in the top 12 to kind of maybe relieve some of the stress about possibly being eliminated early. And Matt Kenseth and Jamie McMurray came into the playoffs as the 15th and 16th seeds due to the fact that they had no wins. And with their strong top 10 runs at Chicagoland, they have also kind of boosted themselves at least into the top 12 for the time being and have a decent cushion to the rest of the field. Kurt Busch, another playoff driver, really disappointed me on Sunday. He came into the weekend, he's had a couple of top 5 finishes recently. They'd shown a lot of new speed that we hadn't seen in a long time, and he came into Chicagoland and they had just a multitude of issues, couldn't get it figured out, and he finished 19th in the race. Ryan Blaney finished 11th. I haven't talked about him that much in recent weeks because he's kind of been there, 11th place. Kind of seems like how he's run. He hasn't really been in contention to win since he got his win at Pocono earlier this year, but he's not really been bad, so I have him moving on past this first round, and I think an 11th place finish will probably get that done if he does that consistently, but, you know, he's not giving himself that much room for error. And that puts him right there on that playoff, on that cut bubble. And Kurt Busch, a lot of people have him at least making it through this round. A lot of people probably maybe even have him making it into the round of 8. Kurt Busch is expected to run well in this round, and he did not start out too great at Chicagoland. The remaining playoff drivers, really, they did what we've seen them do all season. Austin Dillon was 16th, Kasey Kahne was 21st, Newman was 23rd, and 25th place went to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And I can't say I'm disappointed in any of their finishing results because, like I said, that's basically where they've run all season. That's where they've been in points pretty much all season. And it pains me because then when you look at Joey Logano, who finished 7th, and Clint Bowyer, who finished 13th, you again raises the question why these guys are in the playoffs to begin with. I must say I'm a little surprised by the fact that Ryan Newman ran 23rd. I feel like Newman, kind of like Kurt Busch, had a little bit of decent momentum coming into the playoffs. He'd run well in recent weeks. I figured he would make it through this first round, but with his 23rd place finish, I believe he is actually 16th now on the grid. So that is not good. Things do not look well for Ryan Newman. Hopefully he runs better these next 2 weekends. And I should have mentioned earlier, but I must say I was actually impressed with Jamie McMurray finishing 10th. I had McMurray getting out in the round of 16. I had him being one of the first 4 eliminated. That's kind of been the trend for him the last couple of years. He's made the playoffs, but hey, a 10th place run at Chicagoland, not bad. So like I said, there are some drivers that impressed me, like Jamie McMurray, like obviously Martin Truex Jr., and then drivers like Newman and Kurt Busch, and Kyle Busch, I guess, who ultimately disappointed me in their results. So before I move on, let's look at the point standings right now after race number 1. As you can see, obviously drivers like Martin Truex Jr., Kyle Larson, a couple others have a pretty big cushion over the rest of the field. In fact, in Larson's case, he could almost just take a race off, honestly, and still probably move on to the next round. You saw how I mentioned Jamie McMurray, Matt Kenseth were the bottom 2 seeds coming in. They both, as you can see, Kenseth is 9th in points, McMurray is 11th. They're both more than a handful of points ahead of the cut line, so they made good progress at Chicagoland. And then, of course, we focus on the bottom 4, the 4 who currently are on the outside looking in. And, a couple names might surprise you, a couple names I think definitely don't. I'm a little, like I said, I'm a little surprised Newman is in last place right now, but I must say, seeing Ricky Stenhouse, seeing Kasey Kahne there, that's not to be... that was to be expected, I think. So ultimately, I don't really have that much else to say about the playoff grid as of now. We're heading to New Hampshire, then Dover. Both are, mile-long racetracks, very different mile racetracks, but I think we'll see how these they're different from Chicagoland, so we might see some drivers run differently. My big key takeaway from the Chicagoland race was we didn't see that many yellow flags, not that many cautions, not that much drama, and I think that was a good thing for NASCAR this weekend, because me and I'd say a pretty good amount of fans kind of bashed NASCAR after the way they handled Richmond with all their kind of manufacturing yellows and kind of getting overly involved in the outcome. So I think while a lot of people might say the Chicagoland race was kind of boring, and yes, there wasn't a lot of action to be seen around, especially not up towards the front of the pack, I think it was a good race for NASCAR because they needed to have a race where the best driver and the best team won, the second best driver and the second best team finished second, the third best driver and the third best team finished third, and that's kind of how it felt. Truex, who's been the best car all year, won the race. Chase Elliott showed some surprising speed. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute. Harvick, Larson, Hamlin, Kyle Busch was fast even though he had his pit road issues. Those are the drivers that we all expect to make it to the Final Four, or at least contend for the Final Four, and they were the drivers who had the best cars and had the best results on Sunday. And I think it's good for NASCAR to have a race like this every once in a while where the best teams really are rewarded and we don't have too much random finishing results. We don't have drivers who should be finishing 15th getting lucky and finishing 3rd. I think this was a good weekend for NASCAR. They can't have too many of these because they're not that exciting, but I think it's a good thing that they have a race like this every once in a while. So that's all I really have to say about that race specifically. Now on to one of the big news stories that came out earlier this week. It surrounded Chase Elliott. And I keep talking about how Chase Elliott finished second, but I'm not going into much more detail because unfortunately Chase Elliott's car failed post-race inspection. But not in the way we've been used to seeing. We've been used to seeing this year and in recent years, trouble with the rear end, like the alignment or the suspension under the car. That's what got Hamlin and Logano earlier this year for their encumbered wins. That's not what that's not what happened to Chase Elliott. The car failed post-race inspection because they were found to have made modifications to the rear spoiler, presumably in an attempt to gain a little bit of downforce. Chase Elliott, he's going to lose 15 driver points, 15 owner points in the playoff standings. They've been fined $25,000, and Alan Gustafson, whatever his name, the crew chief, has been suspended for 1 race. Also, the result is encumbered, so he did win a stage. He's not going to get to use that bonus point. If you ask me, those penalties aren't that harsh, and the infraction was pretty blatant. At some point during the race, it appeared as though a crew member placed some tape of some sort on the top of the spoiler to kind of raise the spoiler up a little bit, but it looked like it was just a piece of tape, and presumably that's all it was. Now, interestingly enough, high-res photos taken, during the race by photographers made it into the hands of the other teams, not the 24 team, and they noticed that addition to the 24 car, and they brought that attention originally to NASCAR. Obviously, NASCAR was put on high alert to look for that, and that's probably what made the penalty occur. But also, earlier this week, some of the photos kind of got circulated online. A lot of fans saw the photos, saw the infractions. This is before anyone knew that NASCAR was going to give him any sort of penalty, and a lot of people were speculating as to what it was, whether or not they would get caught for it. So I think it was interesting that this isn't really it didn't feel like this was your traditional penalty being handed out. It was he kind of got ratted out on. So anyway, yeah, you can see from some of the photos I've shown here, a little bit of tape. Not sure how much that really helps. I've seen conflicting reports. Some say it could help up to like a 10th or 2 a lap. Others say maybe probably not that much or really at all. Either way, I think NASCAR was a little too lenient with their penalties. I mean, look, I know obviously Denny Hamlin, they won their race, so they threw the book at them. Encumbered race win. I think he lost 30-something bonus points. Crew chief was suspended for, I want to say, 2 races, similarly to what happened to Joey Logano earlier this year. But in both their cases, especially Denny Hamlin's at Darlington, a race where we saw several of the same penalties across several series, across several teams, I thought that was a little harsh. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't think it was harsh. I think that was the perfect penalty. I just think by comparison, Chase Elliott's penalty here is a little lenient. lenient. Because if you look now at the overall playoff standings like I showed you guys earlier, Chase Elliott went from being 6th to 8th, and the loss of 15 points, especially in the stage racing era now, isn't that much. Now, I know Chase Elliott's got a lot of fans, a lot of people are going to want to defend him, and I must say, I'm glad they at least penalized him some. I think we can't argue that. But sure, you can argue the extremity of the penalties. I think they should have penalized him more like 20 or 30 points, just because I don't think 15. I mean, Chase Elliott earned more than 15 stage points this weekend, I think, so I don't know. They basically just took away his stage points he won. He still gets to keep all of his second place points. So I think that's not enough of a penalty. I think that's part of why people don't take NASCAR seriously. I think the same people who want NASCAR to take wins completely away from drivers who get caught post-race, I hope that they're not defending this penalty, because I think if they want such an extreme penalty for cases like that, I think they should look at a penalty like what happened here for Chase Elliott as not nearly harsh enough, especially if that tape, as some people have said, really could have had as a big impact. And like I said, it's just blatant. I mean, we're in the modern day era. Everyone's got super high-res cameras. They can see everything and anything you do to that car. I just wasn't the smartest move, if you ask me. But while we're on the subject of penalties, I do also want to highlight something that I think NASCAR needs to take a bigger look at. I'm sure they've looked at it in the past, but they've never really done anything about it. It's the fact that after drivers win races, especially at tracks like Chicagoland, a very aerodynamic, dependent racetrack, the race winner often will, during their burnouts, completely blow out their rear tires and often kind of wreck their quarter panels on purpose during their post-race celebrations. And in the case of this weekend at Chicagoland, that is what Martin Truex Jr. did. If you watched his post-race burnouts, he blew up those tires, tore out part of his quarter panels, manufactured some damage onto his race car that was not there beforehand. And you may be asking, what's the big deal? I mean, why, if anything, he's hurting his car. Why would anyone care about that? Well, the problem is, when NASCAR immediately after the race takes these cars in to check their alignment, check all their little details, and then ultimately the race winners and stuff are often sent to the R&D, Research and Development Center in Charlotte, where they analyze even more parts of the car. And the problem is that when you intentionally destroy part of your car, especially the rear end, which has been a big hot topic in NASCAR, news recently, it could potentially make it very hard to judge whether or not you were properly aligned before the incident or properly aligned or weren't properly aligned. It makes it very hard for the people who are analyzing your car to be able to tell really what information they need to go off of. Because say Martin Truex Jr., say their car was slightly out of line, or they were worried that it was going to be slightly out of line, by destroying his quarter panels, they could potentially come to NASCAR and say, oh hey, that damage came during the burnouts. That was not there beforehand. I noticed this also at Darlington, where Denny Hamlin ultimately did get a penalty for having his rear end aligned. When he went in to do his burnouts, he drove down by the inside wall to pit road, and when he started his burnout, the back of his car seemed to slightly bump the wall. And at the first, you might think, oh, that was an accident. He just got a little too close to the wall, just a little bump. But when you actually stop and think about it, maybe that was kind of something like, hey, by the way, there's a chance our alignment's going to be off. Maybe bump the wall a little bit, might bump it back into place. We've also had Penske drivers in the past be accused of doing similar things. I remember last year, or maybe it was the year before, Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski on their cool-down lap would often be seen hard swerving their cars side to side in an attempt to try and make sure their rear end was properly aligned. And so in other words, I just think it would be a good idea for NASCAR to really crack down on people doing that type of stuff. Like I know in the case of Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano doing that swerving thing, I think they actually sent out a warning saying, hey, do not do that anymore. But I'm not sure I've ever heard them do anything about people blowing out their rear ends during burnouts, because I've seen it before and people always kind of criticize it, but I've never seen really NASCAR do anything about it. I honestly think NASCAR should say, hey, if you blow out your tires on your burnout or damage your car in any way, that's a $50,000 fine or something like that, because I think otherwise you're just going to have people completely doing it all the time and you're never going to be able to know for sure whether or not they cheated. Obviously, I'm just speculating. I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with Martin Truex Jr.'s car, but he has won a lot this season. He did have the best car at Chicagoland, a very aerodynamic track, so any little thing like that could look very suspicious. So anyway, I don't want to go on about that too much longer, but I do think NASCAR needs to do something. Just needs to say, hey, no matter what, if you do this, we're going to fine you, and I think that would hopefully put an end to it. Anyway, moving on from boring penalty discussion, let's talk about some more positive news. I guess depending on whose side you're on. Kasey Kahne announced earlier this week that he will be driving the number 95 car for Levine Family Racing next season. Now this is good news for Kasey Kahne fans. Bad news, I guess, for Michael McDowell fans, because that means he's going to have to find a car, and it seems like there are a lot of good drivers and not that many good cars out there, so It's unfortunate for him, but I'm sure he'll land on his feet. He seems like a great driver. And honestly, that 95 car seems to often sneak into the top 10, top 15 here and there when you don't expect it. And I think he's a good driver. I think McDowell could end up somewhere. I mean, they have more top 5s this year than Danica Patrick has in her entire career, so there's that. So anyway, yeah, Kasey Kahne will be in that car next season, and if you ask me, it's definitely not an upgrade from his seat in the 5 car, but I don't think it's really much of a downgrade either. Obviously, anytime you leave Hendrick Motorsports, it's tough to go to a team that's as good or better, and I think typically, yeah, Levine Family Racing is not as good as Hendrick Motorsports. They don't have the resources. But like I said a minute ago, that 95 car is typically a 20 to 25th place car, but occasionally they do sneak into the top 10, top 15, kind of show up on your radar every now and then. You're not sure where they came from. And let's face it, guys, Kasey Kahne this year with Hendrick Motorsports has been a 20 to 25th place car, so I don't think he's really losing much speed there. And I don't want to make any brash statements early, but I kind of see some comparisons to this as possibly how Furniture Row Racing came to be the team it is today. If you guys remember when we first started seeing Furniture Row Racing 7, 8, 10 years ago and stuff, they were a single car team, were rarely competitive. They got their win in 2011 with Regan Smith, but it was kind of a strategy play. They didn't have a dominant car by any means, and really, up until 2 or 3 years ago, they were not what I would consider a contender. But then when they signed Kurt Busch to the 78, he drove that car for a year, they showed some signs, and then when Martin Truex Jr., who'd kind of been already an established veteran in the series before, came into that car, since then, obviously, they've been great. They've made it to a Final Four at Homestead. This year, they've won 5 races, and probably going to go to Homestead again. They've been great. And you look at Levine Family Racing, it's a single car team that's kind of been not so great, kind of left in the back of the pack a lot, but now they're adding a veteran in Kasey Kahne who's had success, but not an overwhelming amount of success in his career. You never know, a couple years down the line, maybe that 95 car makes the playoffs. Wouldn't be the most surprising thing we've seen. But I guess time will tell. I'm not sure what else to make of it. I'm excited for Kasey Kahne, glad that he got a ride. We still got some other big names. Kurt Busch's name's still up in the air. Danica Patrick's, Matt Kenseth, still don't know what their plans are, and they've been pretty, tight-lipped about it, so we'll see how that develops. Silly season's still going. So anyway, that's really the biggest news from this weekend, this week in NASCAR. I guess let's talk a little bit about New Hampshire predictions. I messed up last week and talked most of the time about the playoff and my playoff predictions. I didn't talk at all about Chicagoland picks, so I didn't even make a pick for last weekend. I'm not going to make that same mistake this week, so let's talk about New Hampshire. And if I could be quite frank about New Hampshire, I know you guys may not like this, but I'm just going to come out and say it. This weekend's race is going to be dominated by Toyota. And I know a lot of you guys don't like Toyotas. You think they're all cheaters. You think they're all the scum of the earth. But I'm just bracing you guys for it because I think Toyota is going to be basically the fastest couple of cars throughout the entire weekend. I mean, you look at the race back in June, Denny Hamlin won, Truex was 3rd, Kenseth was 4th. I think Daniel Suarez was even up there near the top 5. You had Toyotas up and down the top of the finishing results. And historically, New Hampshire in recent years has been great for Matt Kenseth. It's been good for Martin Truex Jr. Denny Hamlin obviously knows how to run at short tracks. Toyota has been running well lately. I don't see any way around it. I think this race is going to be dominated by Toyota. So I'm just preparing you guys for that reality when it comes true. But when it comes to my actual pick, all signs say I should pick either Hamlin or Kenseth or Truex or Kyle Busch. All signs say that would be the most logical, reasonable thing to do. So why wouldn't I do that? And the answer to that question is because I feel like taking a risk. I am picking Kevin Harvick to win this weekend at New Hampshire. And yes, I know that goes against everything I just said. It's going to be dominated by Toyotas, Hey, I didn't say that Toyota couldn't finish 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. I just think Kevin Harvick will win the race, win the race this weekend. Now, why do I say that? Kevin Harvick's been good at New Hampshire in the past. They finished 3rd at Chicagoland this weekend. Now, Kevin Harvick's been kind of an under-the-radar team. He's lived up to his whole, where did he come from, persona this year. You really haven't talked that much about him, but often he pops up there in the top 5, and he's won this year. But he's been good at New Hampshire in the past. He's honestly showed more speed than I expected him to show at Chicagoland this last weekend, which makes me think he's ready for the playoffs. He's got his best equipment in the car week in, week out. I think he wins at New Hampshire and breaks up that Toyota dominance. But anyway, that's my picks. What are you guys' picks? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching this week's episode of Out of the Groove. Hope you enjoyed it. You can follow me on Twitter. Links are down and below. I talk about racing on there all the time. You guys can chat with me there. Other links, I have Double E Cup Series Season 8 is returning, or we're getting back into it very soon. I've finally had time and the resources to work on the new race, so that will be out within the week, I should think. I put out a poll on Twitter earlier this week asking you guys whether or not you preferred the episodes like today's, which are kind of a longer single episode that I would be doing once a week, or if you prefer me switch the format to more of a 2 episode a week but shorter episodes. Like, how lately my episodes have been getting long, 15, 20 minutes often. I was saying you could either do that, or would you guys rather me switch it to 2 episodes a week, each one being maybe 7 to 8 minutes, maybe an episode on Monday, an episode on Thursday, something like that throughout the week. I set up a poll on Twitter, and most people said they preferred the long format episodes like this one, so I guess I'll keep doing that. You guys can, if you have strong opinions either way, you can leave your questions or your opinions in the comments. I'll look at them, but I guess for the time being, I'll probably just stick to one episode a week. I mean, either works for me, and I don't think either makes my life any harder or easier, so I just figured what you guys might want, and I guess most people would prefer the long format like this. So anyway, if you have an opinion, let me know. That's all I have to say. I don't want to make this episode run any longer than it has to be, but that's all for me. Hope you guys enjoy the race this weekend. Hope you guys stay tuned for more from this channel, and I'll see y'all, I guess, next Thursday. Have a good one.